Hello everyone, and welcome back to Purgatory, where I'll keep narrating even the most ridiculous of lines in the smoothest of voices as I force you to follow me on a new crafting escapade. And new this escapade is. In fact, it's an absolute first for me. I hadn't had the faintest of notions that you could customize dolls that are usually packaged and marketed as children's toys, and I fell down a rabbit hole, as immediately I knew I needed to create fantasy characters from the Dungeons & Dragons campaign I'm a part of with no hesitation nor consideration to financial responsibility. The first doll I will be creating ever in my life is a fellow player who plays a high elven princess, 𝓕𝓪𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼. Join me as I create my first ever one-of-a-kind doll, or OOAK doll? Oak doll? Something like that. See, it all began a few months ago. I stumbled across a channel that made customized dolls, 𝓕𝓪𝓷𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼 to be specific, and in about 1.2 milliseconds I was already downloading eBay and searching for used up old dolls. For my first doll, I chose one from the Ever After High range. Don't ask me which, I have no idea. And this is the state she arrived in. As you can see, her head is a lot larger than most Monster High dolls, which I wasn't a fan of, so I'll be remedying that in large cranium soon. She came from a small doll lot with no clothes and cut hair. Nothing really, except for these little bracelets. I was too afraid to pull the hands off just yet, so I just cut the bracelets straight off the tiny wrists.
Cut! Ah!
The first step when customizing a doll is to cut the hair as close as you can to the factory roots. The more you cut, the easier it is to remove the plugs, as I will soon learn. Here she is with her new cropped pixie. I actually think it's a little cute, but alas, not what I need here today. After disposing of the huge hair wad that the already cut hair left behind, I must remove what remains. I've boiled water in my kettle and am pouring it into a glass container. This is necessary, you see, for one of the most nerve-wracking steps in the process, removing the head.
Oh, this is the worst part. It's so stressful. I don't want to. Give me your hand. Come on. Oh. Okay. Phew. Ugh, it's just glue. How do I get the hair? Oh, I pulled out a tag. Look at that. It's so gross. Look at it. You can see it bulging on the head like worms, like parasites. Oh yeah, all right. Business. This is business. Just kind of scraping around blindly in here. Ew. This is so tough. Is it this tough for everyone?
Boiling water softens the vinyl and melts the glue, which allows you to pull the hair plugs through the neck hole. I was tentative to soak the head for too long, since I was worried for no reason that soaking a doll head in boiling water for too long would cause undetermined bad things to happen. So I wasn't soaking her long enough, and the plug removal process was painfully long. Eventually, however, I was successful. Next, a highly anticipated part of the process for me, and it was every bit as satisfying as it looked in 𝓕𝓷𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼's videos, removing the factory paint with acetone.
Ew, look at.
Ew! This was so mesmerizing, I even preferred using Q-tips the entirety of the time to intentionally prolong the removal process. It was so delicious to remove small areas bit by bit, rather than choosing efficiency with a cotton swab or a pad. After her chemical swab was another step that had my nerves curling up on their ends and further into my body, a chemical bath, aka the head shrinking. I mixed 9 parts water to 1 part acetone and completely submerged the doll head.
Stop it. I need your neck hole.
And now she soaks. This method is a slow shrinking process. For 48 hours, I will leave her to her watery grave to be reborn with far more pleasing proportions. Over this time, the head will expand as chemicals in the silicone are expelled into the acetone mixture around her. In the meantime, I will give her body a swab since the greasiness of the head disgusted me, and I'd rather not think about what that means for the rest of her. What goes up must come down, and what expands in acetone must shrink in air. After my timer has chimed, I removed the head and allowed it adequate time to dry. Within this time, it continues to shrink. Here she is now with a little bit of drying time. Not another complete 24 hours, as I'd like to reroot her hair before she gets the chance to harden completely. But as you'll see, she is now far more proportionate to her body size. Now the aforementioned rerooting. Rerooting is the process of inserting new hair plugs into the skull of a doll, as well as potentially reshaping the hairline, which I'd like to do in my case. Since my doll head has been shrunk, I must re-poke the holes for the plugs just before inserting hair. I have made a rudimentary rerooting tool with an X-Acto knife base and a hand sewing needle whose eye I have cut at an angle with wire cutters. The hair inserts between the two prongs of the cut needle eye, and then the tip of this tool is pressed into the newly punched plug hole.
There's hair in her. Look at this.
I begin with the hairline at the base of her skull on her neck. I found it easiest to begin from the very bottom and work my way up towards the front hairline. I also found later on that I'd been inserting far more hair than necessary in each plug, a rookie mistake I would soon come to regret. And here she is with a full head of hair. I reconstructed her hairline based on her original design for the campaign, drawn by 𝓕𝓷𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼. She has a slight widow's peak that cleanly arches around her temples, and here's the excess yarn that came off in the stranding process. I'm now filling her head with PVA glue, far from what the real 𝓕𝓼𝓬𝓮's head is filled with, I'm sure, to hold the new hair plugs in place. Like I mentioned earlier, I would come to regret doing this before pulling a few more plugs, no morbidity intended, as she has a lot of hair, as is apparent to anyone with vision. After completing the reroot, I tie her hair up in a Trolls doll-esque ponytail and pin plastic wrap around her hairline to protect it from upcoming work. It is at this point that I am also reattaching the head, as it was still shrinking, and I preferred her to do that around the neck peg. This didn't spare me from needing to do some fairly hefty sanding around the entrance of the neck hole and neck peg, repeatedly, little by little, over and over, bit by bit, until her head was able to slip back on snugly. I tried this many times. Before proceeding, some small sculpting was needed for the absolutely iconic pointy elven ears. Using Milliput, an epoxy-based 2-part clay, I fashioned tiny ears for her. Well, I tried, for a while.
So first, I'm gonna start with, with this guy. Okay, the ear is becoming disfigured. I'll figure this out. Shut up. Shut up. Do you think it's easier to make the ear part and then attach it?
Yes.
Okay. Let's do this again.
I attempted a few different iterations and sizes before determining I needed to model the ears separately from her head and then transplant them. And even still, I iterated a few times more. After her ears were completely dry, I sprayed down the whole doll with Mr. Super Clear matte varnish, save it be a small area on her foot so I had somewhere to suspend her while she dried. I gave her 3 initial coats total, and after letting her sit, she was ready for her face-up. I also painted her ears to match her skin tone, but I was far too concentrated to film that part. With my new fancy and completely financially responsible purchase of Faber-Castell's 𝓷𝓼𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼 collection watercolor pencils, I began marking a light peach where the ridges of her eyes would go. I began building up her sharp cat's eye makeup with black and a few other colors underneath. After outlining her eyes, I gave her another spray of Mr. Super Clear and turned to soft pastels to add some dimension, contouring, and blush to liven up her skin. The process was essentially these tools, iterated on top of each other and layered over time. I winged a lot during this process, and it took many coats worth of buildup in watercolor pencil, a top pastel, a top watercolor pencil, to achieve the final look of her whole face. Princess 𝓕𝓐𝓐𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼 is a high elven princess with a draconic bloodline that grants her with gifts in sorcery. Her mother is a royal high elf from the Feywild, and her father is a roguish bronze dragon with power over lightning. This inspired 𝓕𝓐𝓐𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮 for proclivities for sorcery, storms, and all things posh. As she grows older and stronger in her power, she excitedly awaits to see how her half-bronze draconic abilities will manifest themselves, and how powerful the strength of her mother's magical capacity will lead her to become. As the daughter of royalty, she inherited her parents' natural ability to lead, and their valiant desire to conquer evil lands and create an empire of her own. Though an absolute child at heart, as she progresses and refines her abilities, the dangerously terrifying beauty akin to Galadriel herself begins to manifest in Her Royal Highness Princess 𝓕𝓐𝓐𝓲𝓬𝓮. That isn't to say she isn't as prim and proper and pretentious as they come. England doesn't exist in the magical land of Varentia, but 𝓕𝓐𝓐𝓲𝓬𝓮 would make you check a map twice to make sure that it doesn't. Ask her anything requiring her to touch dirt, she'd rather die. Ask her where her accent might have come from, since neither of her parents seem to have anything similar to it when they speak. Oh, she will make sure you learn from where the proper British eloquence was gifted from. Question her methods, morals, or decisions, especially in her own homeland. Fool, she is the law. Ask her not to step on you, her shoes are worth more than the previous 5 generations of your family. She'll make sure she takes them off first. Electricity crackles through her hair, and her emerald eyes glow brightly when she's angry, or secretly when she's also flustered. And though her hair appears silkenly soft, touch it only if you wish for death, as it's home to all of her little hidden creatures. As a half-dragon, she has a radar for all things shiny, and collects them in a growing horde of her own. Despite misfortune that has managed to befall even a princess, she carries on, holds her head high, and she worries lest her kingdom, and sometimes even her friends and family, may think less of her. And with an arrogant, selfish, chaotic drow as her traveling companion, yes, that's me, you can imagine the interactions during their adventures get rather, well, improperly unsavory for Her Royal Highness at times. Her brilliant green eyes were a very important point of emphasis for her face-up. As she casts, they glow. I wished to create a natural gradient that drew the eyes to, her eyes, so to speak. I came in to add small details, such as the lip line, highlights above the upper lip and on her eyelids, the contouring of her ears' interiors, the whites of her eyes, and other small touch-ups. Merwin's pupils are draconic slits, darkly set against her light irises. Getting tiny details within the eyes was a multi-step process, one which even required a tiny itty-bitty paintbrush and some acrylic paint to detail. The eyelashes were a particular point of anxiety. I used black acrylic paint and the thinnest detail brush I had. As I stroked each one onto the face with the brush, I knew it would never come off. Even more terrifying when I painted the upper lid lashes, which swooped down across her perfectly painted irises. Despite the internal panic, my hands remained steady, and I'm actually quite satisfied with how they came out. After some final detailing on the eyes, and minor touch-ups here and there, her face was complete. I gave her one final spray of Mr. Super Clear to set everything in its place. For the finishing touch, using Vallejo gloss varnish, I added a coat to her lips and eyes to give them a shine. Doll makers beware! I hadn't sprayed the final coat of Mr. Super Clear matte varnish thickly enough, and it caused some slight bleeding on the eyes of all places. I had to come back in and touch them up again, and rest assured I will be finishing with more than one coat of Mr. Super Clear in the future. Next was the clothing. I'll admit, I foresaw this as a formidable task, and I was right to see it as such, as the task was indeed very formidable. Merwin's clothing consists of a shimmering navy blue dress with a cream underlayer, with bronze cording and trim, as well as a large royal purple cloak that drapes over her shoulders and flows behind her. I'd been thinking about the design for quite some time before arriving at its execution. I purchased 2 patterns, a dress, and a cloak from 𝓕𝓷𝓰 on Etsy. Link will be in the description for each. I wished for the dress and underlayer to be very tight and form-fitting, and as such, I devised a method to cinch the back and front with cords and small metal loops. They only came in silver, so I planned to hide them underneath the bronze trim. Cutting and sewing clothing in miniature is a lot more complicated than cutting and sewing in regular size, even with cute mini stork scissors, and especially with a sewing machine. Stitches have to be slow and precise, and even still, I had trouble. I relied a lot on my camera woman for help, as she's got a proclivity for sewing much more efficiently than I do. Attaching the trim was a particularly difficult task along such a small edge. I also foolishly did not purchase stretchy fabric for the dress, as I was unwilling to compromise on the pretty sheen and color of the navy blue, so attempting to avoid wrinkling and bunching was a constant battle when tailoring for such a small figure. The cloak fabric was more manageable, as it was far thinner and more flowy. For the bronze cloak clasps, I fashioned small metal bead ends used in jewelry, with wire wrapping pliers to form a small loop before cutting the excess. Goodbye.
Where does it go?
I then looped a bronze chain between each clasp with jump rings. This required me to sew tiny buttonholes manually into the cloak by hand, which I didn't get a recording of, since all you would have seen on screen is my thick, meaty fingers, as the workspace was so small. That, and I didn't do the buttonholes at all. I made my camera woman do it, and therefore no one was there to record. Next, I began a crucial piece, 𝓕𝓪𝓴𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼 crown. There was no bronze wire available, so I used a combination of thicker copper wire and smaller gauge gold wire, which I felt created a somewhat bronze shade if you squint and cross your eyes a bit. I have some experience wire wrapping from cosplay pieces I've created in the past. I wished for the crown to be adjustable, so I left it open in the back. I created the base with copper wire, which I looped around itself at the back and towards the front again, to mimic the shapes of 𝓕𝓪𝓴𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮 circlet. I then took the gold and wrapped it around the twice-thick base, beginning from the back and working my way towards the front, where I would loosen the weave into small spirals. Apologies for the camera angle. It's difficult to get a good view of work that causes me to move my hands wildly at such a close and small scale. After making the metal decal for the circlet, it was time for the most important piece, 𝓕𝓪𝓴𝓲𝓷𝓬𝓮𝓼𝓼 castor. The emerald gem at the center of her crown is imbued with magic that permits casting abilities, which she uses when practicing sorcery. For this purpose, I purchased an authentic faceted emerald gemstone. I didn't wish to adhere it directly to the crown, as I was paranoid that glue would dull the surface of the emerald. As such, I created a small milliput cabochon for the emerald to sit within. It simply wouldn't do to leave this little piece ugly dirty white, and as a solution, I covered it in copper leafing that matched the tone of her crown to give it a metallic shine. I began with the liquid adhesive, which I allowed to dry until completely clear after application. Where did it go? Ah!
Absolutely baffling.
After locating the tiny sticky piece, I applied the leafing and pressed it onto its surface gently with a loose bristled brush. I dusted the excess and then coated the entire thing with leafing sealant to give it a protective layer until the end of time. I used an epoxy-based glue to adhere the gem base to the crown before applying the gem itself. The epoxy glue is a two-part adhesive that hardens in 5 minutes, but reaches near impossibly unbreaking strength after 24 hours. I trusted nothing else to hold my precious emerald. Now it was time for the final step before her total assembly, her hairstyle. I had hoped the yarn would retain some of its natural crimping, but after so much battering of this doll, it was in quite the state. It required much attention, and attention I gave it. Over a period of 4 to 5 hours, I cut, thinned, curled, flattened, placed, and styled her far too poofy hair into the best orientation I could manage. I lost a lot of my hairstyling footage in an unfortunate event that consisted of a 4 terabyte external hard drive being pulled out of a USB 2 port by gravity while in the middle of usage, but to summarize the footage that my poor editor spent over a literal week trying to recover to no avail, after thinning the hair with thinning shears and hair trimmers, I crimped it by heating up a metal chopstick in hot water and wrapping small sections around its base and holding them there with one hand, while with the other, gooping the strand up with wax pomade. And after a lot of accidentally off-camera work, her hair is styled to the best of my abilities. I must admit, her hairstyling was the part I was least happy with. I've never been one to style my own hair in general much, and I lack even the basic skills in that area. It will take a lot of practice on my future dolls to reach that point of satisfaction. And with that, all parts are complete. There's nothing left for us other than final assembly. In the magical world of 𝓟𝓼𝓲, Mirwin can't get dressed unless she takes her hands off, so that will be the icing on the 𝐿𝐿𝐴𝐾 doll cake to finish out the entire process. With hands returned to their rightful sockets, she is completely done. Though there are areas I wish to improve upon in the future, overall I'm incredibly happy with how my first ever doll customization has gone. Thank you for joining me as I created Princess 𝓕𝓏 𝓬𝓫, and I hope you'll join me in the future as I create more characters from our campaign world. Eventually, maybe, I'll work up the nerve to make even my own character. The only thing left for us now is something that brings me great excitement: her professional photo shoot and the final results.